Good morning and good afternoon. Thanks for tuning in and for spending time with Veritas. Ransomware, if but when national or reserve banks issuing notices that financial services institutions are targets. A prominent corporation reporting millions of cyber attacks and scams within a handful of months. There are very few meetings that I go to where the notion of ransomware or cyber resilience is not brought up. Of course, the cost of ransomware is only part of the story. Weeks of downtime, 2 to 3 on average, and in some cases, we see customers taking months to fully recover. My name is Jeff Coley, and I lead our technical teams across the region relating to architecture and design. And in this session, you'll learn how Veritas can help you address the threat of ransomware. More specifically, we'll look at how we recently helped the CEO of a global brand assess their readiness and design, and also regain confidence by deploying a multi-layered resiliency strategy. With ransomware, it's no longer a question of if you will be attacked, but when. And that is quite concerning, the fear of the unknown. Ransomware does not favor one organization over the next, although some industries like financial services, infrastructure or telecommunications, utilities, government are perhaps more desirable. We are, however, equally vulnerable to an attack. That is, of course, unless we are prepared. And being prepared for an attack doesn't mean we've given in. It means that when an attack comes, we're ready to know that we have done all we can to expect the attack, and we're ready to know how we might best react. You see, every 11 seconds, an organization is hit by a ransomware attack. 42% of organizations have been hit by ransomware, a study suggests. And this study comprised nearly 3,000 senior IT executives at companies themselves containing more than 1,000 employees. Email attacks remain the #1 delivery method. 64% of organizations have not kept up with security measures. 1 in 10 organizations are unable to recover. 20% of company data would be unrecoverable in the event of complete data loss. And of course, overall, we see a damages bill of about $1.85 to $2 million US, comprising people, process, and technology, just to be able to effectively fire drill and, of course, recover. So that brings me to the question of the day. Are you prepared? If your organization was attacked today, are you confident that you have the right technology and the right processes in place to mitigate its threat? I have some quotes from recent Australian CIOs and CTOs relating to ransomware. Allow me to indulge. Post-ransomware attack, what would we know? Not enough. FSI, financial services. It's the basics, along with evolved operating models and tools. Fast-moving consumer goods and retail. Talking with the executive is very challenging when explaining risk. Quote from the government. Recovering more than one data set or IT service in the event of a failure would be extremely challenging. Education. Ransomware typically means we don't lose a site or a data center. It's hard to map and, of course, hard to fire drill. And what amazes me is that in a study we conducted last year, we found that 57% of large enterprises surveyed, large enterprises again comprising more than 1,000 employees, do not regularly test data recovery plans. I see organizations adding more technology, not less. I see organizations needing diverse skills, common off-the-shelf software, born in the cloud applications, infrastructure as a service, moving to containers, and of course, adding orchestration layers. Though there's still critical multi-tier apps that are not distributed, not cloud native, rooted in performant technologies like AIX and Solaris. How do you take control and manage risk in such a diverse landscape? Well, you need the right multi-layered strategy to look at what we call anomalous behavior, to address data at rest, to orchestrate recovery, to capture data from the edge to the core, to the cloud, to identify what data you have, and also look for personally identifiable information, or PII. You need to be able to classify and evaluate the risk of exposure. You need to align to a data management lifecycle. Why? Because prudential standards are suggesting that you do. And you need to be able to classify and make data immutable, archivable, and discoverable. Now, Watching the news these days, there's no escaping the imminent threat of ransomware. One prominent and very recent attack that took an emotional, financial, and physical and also economic toll was the Colonial pipeline attack. This ransomware or cyber event caused a sweeping outage impacting not just Colonial's business, but the US economy as a whole. I remember seeing on the TV people queuing up at petrol or gas stations, as an example. Now, of course, as days and weeks progressed, the fear and uncertainty of recovery became so overwhelming that the ransomware was purportedly paid. It seemed like the easy option at the time. Eventually, and upon review, the CEO was called to testify in front of the US Congress, given the magnitude of the event, which was certainly not a position that I'd like to find myself in, nor would any, I would suggest, senior executive. The Colonial pipeline event certainly was not the first, and it certainly won't be the last, but this attack has garnered enough attention for CEOs globally to question whether they have done enough to prepare. And that brings me to the CEO of what I'll refer to now, you see, as 3 Pillars Corp. We had a more Americanized name, though we did so because we've been unable to publish more specific customer detail. Now, I figured that 4 Pillars, to change the name, is a decent Australian gin. I like gin, you see. And we'll take a pillar away because we're going to talk ostensibly today in threes. Right, so 3 Pillars it is. This CEO at 3 Pillars, a Veritas customer who saw the headlines unfold, feared being in the same position as Colonial, and he asked his team the same questions. Are we prepared? Are we confident that we have done enough? Such a simple question triggered a series of events magnified by fear that began with an urgent email from the CEO to their CIO and the broader technology executive. The email read, "The Colonial pipeline incident can happen to us. What is our degree of readiness to deal with an attack like that?" The question was posed. The CEO wanted to know what data is important and where does it reside. CEO wanted to know, are our systems up to date? Are we current on patches and versions? Now, I can think of customers running Windows 2008. Have we identified and prioritized our critical systems? Have we tried to restore or backup? What does it take and how long does it take? I can think of customers who haven't tested and have lost petabytes of data due to architecture and design decisions. CEO asked, do we have an incident plan? Have we tested it? Have we looked at scenarios to see if we pass or fail? How would we respond? I'm amazed by the number of organizations who cannot talk to how key business services hang together, especially since they've moved to cloud. As I've said, you're adding more tech, you're getting out of your data centers. That's what you're telling us. But are you maintaining a view of how things are kept available? How are you measuring that end-to-end customer experience? It's beyond availability. The CEO also asked, what about BCP? What about our DR team? Can they truly react to a cyber event rather than the loss of a site? Now, the 3 Pillars CIO and the Chief Information Security Officer worked with their respective teams to evaluate their own readiness. And while they knew security policies, they had other measures, they were still, however, surprised to learn that they were behind in some aspects of technology. They'd not kept up with release and deployment management, software versions and upgrades. They hadn't run a series of enhanced test scenarios. For example, if they found all applications marked critical were down, would they know, and in what order, and how to prioritize, understand dependencies, and bring them all back online? While they had security personnel and security trained people on staff, they lacked advanced skills. It's beyond your firewalls. It's around penetration testing and forensic analysis as to what's going on the perimeter. Also, little thought was given about detecting what else might be going on at a data level. You see, again, it's beyond that intrusion prevention and intrusion detection and data loss prevention tools. It's got to be a more holistic view, anomalous behavior. Recognizing the changes that they faced, 3 Pillars immediately turned to Veritas, a long-term strategic partner. And what we did is we looked for our approach to outline through a series of best practices how to help 3 pillars get ahead of the challenge. We deployed our business critical or BCS team, and we took 3 pillars through a 3-step process for ransomware resiliency. And it started with a health check assessment and a best practice assessment. The Veritas business critical or BCS team met with 3 pillars to conduct a stakeholder survey. And we looked at other forms of systems reporting that we could take to establish a baseline of their data protection environment. Now, we considered whether 3 pillars had a cybersecurity response plan and who does what in the circumstance that something anomalous gets detected. We considered how their team members had been trained for DR and BCP events and how to execute those when necessary. We considered the whole software versioning piece because we'd identified that they were lacking in that area. We considered the notion of adopting automation and orchestration that ties together critical dependencies between an IT service or business applications, moving away or reducing the level of human intervention. And we also looked at different ways of keeping data at rest, so immutable storage being a key option. Now, working together, our focus on people and process and technology allowed us to evaluate how closely 3 pillars was to best practices. Now, while 3 pillars were found to be strong overall, several gaps were found through the health check that really did increase their risk profile. Now, we looked at people that didn't have strict access management policies. And without a solid resiliency plan in place, the team lacked the confidence in their ability to recover from an event. From a process standpoint, 3 pillars storage lifecycle policy backlog had well surpassed 5 days. What is a storage lifecycle policy backlog? It's a bit technical, isn't it? Well, what that means is data that had been backed up in one environment wasn't being replicated offsite to another environment. And this means that, again, not all data is replicated. So if a site got lost, there was an impact or a potential for, quite extenuated data loss. Testing for data as well wasn't consistent. And lastly, because 3 pillars was not up to date with their own technology, they weren't leveraging newer, more advanced functionality such as data encryption at rest and anomaly detection. And of course, they also had a fragmented architecture of, like most organizations do, data on-prem, data at the edge, data in multiple data centers. We've got SaaS, we've got multi-cloud. A common view of that data footprint end to end wasn't there, right? Certainly wasn't duplicated, which also added to cost. Data and backup routines were hard to identify, hard to schedule, and of course, hard to track. Now, with 3 pillars, risks and gaps identified, we started to work towards that multi-layered resiliency strategy. I'll tell you some more. To achieve ransomware resiliency, we focused on 3 areas, right? See, there's the hook. I'm trying to tie it together now, just in case you weren't fully tuned in. We're focusing on 3 pillars or 3 key areas. And those areas were best practices for safeguarding data integrity. Those practices focused on tools to monitor and detect anomalies and events. They focused on methods for streamlining and automating recovery elements. Now, pillar 1 talks about protect. The first step in any resiliency plan is to ensure full protection of data that is automated and make sure it auto scales. This includes backing up all parts of 3 pillars environments, from physical and virtual to cloud and containers, considering immutable storage and system hardening in the process. Critical to scaling properly, 3 pillars were able to apply a universal protection approach automatically, regardless of what the architecture is. I made the mention earlier around edge to core to cloud. Now, from a detection perspective, pillar 2, have you heard the phrase, you're only as strong as your weakest link? Well, the weakest link is exactly what ransomware preys upon, targeting the dark, vulnerable corners of your environment. Now, for 3 pillars to close potential gaps, we enabled them with universal visibility to monitor and ensure that all systems are protected. And we also help them identify anomalous behavior, that deviation from standard, what's not normal. We help them identify that before we see or they encountered a critical situation. Examples here would be backup size variations, dedupe rate changes, to name a few. Then we get to the third pillar and we talk about recovery. Well, with an on-prem and cloud strategy, 3 pillars needed as many reliable and automated options as possible for cross-cloud, cross-data center, cross-system replication and restoration. Now, this includes things like alternate recovery sites, secondary data centers, the ability to stand up an entire logical data center in a cloud, AWS or Azure as examples, on demand, which they only found possible to do in an orchestrated means with Veritas. So 3 pillars rallied around resiliency, and with renewed focus, they began implementing best practice recommendations that our BCS team took them through as part of a health check assessment. Let's take a look further. Now, just a brief segue, the notion, by the way, of protect, detect, and recover aligns to the USA-based National Institute of Standards and Technology, or the NIST framework. For those of you that are not aware, NIST is a cyber resiliency standard that focuses on identifying, protecting, responding, and ensuring site, service, and data recovery. 3 pillars have hardened access management routines in this process and have adopted multi-factor authentication or role-based access control, RBAC. Right? Now, this happens now within the backup platform. And I talk about a backup platform because that's critical. We want to make sure that there's a universal view of data, regardless of where it's at rest. 3 pillars is now set up with a strong defense strategy. They've deployed a flex appliance architecture to safeguard their data at rest on a hardened system, complete with immutable storage that's managed internally by a compliance clock. Now, that's really, really key, because what you're doing, you're setting retention to make the data immutable. So we want to make sure the clock that sets the retention policy is independent of the operating system or things like NTP, a network time protocol. This means that even against the strongest ransomware attack, the risk of data being compromised, being changed or deleted is negligible. 3 pillars then applied stringent identity and access management with multi-factor authentication to the backup platform. And finally, 3 pillars implemented data encryption at rest and in flight. They didn't have it. Data encryption at rest and in flight to ensure that both structured and unstructured data is always protected. For maximum efficiency and best use of resources, 3 pillars then look for opportunities to streamline and optimize their data protection investment and provide a level of coverage across all their workloads and across all data sources. So first, 3 pillars defined intelligent policies to automatically discover and protect new workloads as they come online. And with the ability to back up snapshots to anywhere, 3 pillars can better align their protection plans with agreed recovery time and recovery point objectives. Now, when we did our best practice assessment, recovery time and recovery point objectives just weren't set. They weren't defined, they weren't mapped. Next, 3 pillars leveraged Veritas for its own or our own advanced API support. So the whole idea is to change or vary the operating model to allow the backup platform to be more closely integrated with ticketing systems like ServiceNow, and to effectively allow for logging and detection of errors in a more simplistic way. And of course, because we cover over 800 data sources, 1,400 storage targets, and multiple cloud providers, 60 plus different cloud targets, it's great that you can integrate that tightly in your operating model and have less eyes on glass. And finally, 3 pillars can do all of this, knowing that with cloud auto scaling, the dynamic resizing of resources based on demand, they're doing so without waste. So in other words, the net backup environment in the cloud or containerized will shrink and grow on demand. And what that does, that improves overall, I'll call it, for want of a better term, capital utilization. Since some of 3 pillars data resides in SaaS applications like Slack and Microsoft 365 and SharePoint, they thought the coverage of those vendors or those SaaS providers was enough from a backup or data capture perspective. They thought that in the event of an outage or an attack, recovery was assured. However, through the health check exercise, 3 pillars learned that data stored in their SaaS-based applications were not actually within anyone's real control, right? And the functionality to back up and prevent valuable data was rudimentary at best. So for instance, if one of their business users accidentally deleted a customer record from a CRM tool, online, SaaS-based, if that record was deleted more than 30 days ago, this information wouldn't be simply or easily recovered. Now, why is that? Because the data is only retained by the SaaS provider for the best part of a month. The other part of it too is they found out that to be able to recover, it wasn't an incremental recovery, it was a complete restoration of data, and that made things really problematic. But the point here, the example that we're trying to make, right, is that if you've got a simple human error where a customer record's deleted, imagine if hundreds and hundreds or thousands of records were deleted. Imagine if this was a malicious event. You see, for full protection against ransomware, 3 Pillars took a position of wanting a unified resiliency plan, which meant regaining, if you will, control of all their data, regardless of where it resides. SaaS, multi-cloud, multiple data centers, file shares, edge of the network, to name a few examples. And in doing so, 3 Pillars extended their data protection with a common view of their data at rest, with a common view of data, the majority of which was deduplicated. The consideration of Net Backup Recovery Vault, of course, Veritas now provides unmatched data management with a fully integrated, flexible repository for all of 3 Pillars data sources, from on-premise to their public workloads. 3 Pillars will be able to simplify the cloud as a storage capability with limitless scale. Right? So data at rest, sitting in the cloud for long-term retention, offered as a service from Veritas with no cost to move data ostensibly in and out. Net Backup Recovery Vault is on 3 Pillars roadmap, and once implemented, they will be able to securely retain data in cloud without compromising crucial security or compliance policies. Let's now take a moment to look at how 3 Pillars have implemented immutable and indelible backups using worm storage. I'll briefly hand over to Jason, one of our local and Melbourne-based senior architects, Jason Schwong. If you're in Australia, you really should get to know him.
Thanks, Jeff. In this Protect segment, I will cover the immutable storage options available on a worm appliance and walk you through creating a worm-enabled storage unit for Net Backup. Before we dive into these high-level steps, I'd like to cover the different immutability modes or lockdown modes available on the Flex appliance. We have 3 modes: normal, enterprise, and compliance mode. The default mode of the Flex appliance is normal and does not support immutable storage. The next one is the enterprise mode. It offers immutable storage with the flexibility for specific personas to securely override the lockdown process. It's basically the 4 eyes rule. Lastly, we have the compliance mode. It provides immutable storage with the highest restrictions. Instances can only be deleted if all immutable data has been removed. Next, let us create a worm storage server using one of the lockdown modes. When trying to create an instance of the worm storage server, the only option is displayed if a lockdown mode has been selected. To do the selection for the lockdown mode, the top right corner, let's click on Edit under the lockdown mode, and that brings up a choice of normal, enterprise, or compliance. Let's choose enterprise and go ahead and save the selection. Once the enterprise mode is enabled, you can go and create the instance again. So starting the instance, you choose the worm storage server type. You notice the worm capable flag on the right. Choose it, and let's go click Next. Here we're going to go ahead and give some parameters. So the worm storage server needs a host name and also the minimum and maximum retention time settings. Next, we need to prepare to connect it to a Net Backup primary server by specifying its CA certificate fingerprint. After you've done this, you can go and click Next, and a storage server will be created and associated with the Net Backup primary server. The remaining steps include creating a disk pool and storage units. So for creating a disk pool, click Add on the Disk Pools tab. We choose the worm storage server that we just created. Click Select and give it a disk pool name. The high watermark and low watermark can be left at default. Click Next. There's a default volume for the deduplication pools. Select that, and that wraps up the disk pool configuration. Once the disk pool is done, we can create a storage unit and make sure we enable worm there as well. So give the storage unit a name, the max number of jobs, and select Next. We go ahead and select the disk pool and make sure the Enable Worm button is checked below. That ensures that the worm functionality will be enabled for images written here. This wraps up the worm storage server configuration on a Flex appliance. Organizations can achieve both immutability and indelibility on a hardened platform and jump from zero to worm storage in just that one easy step with the Flex appliance. Back to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Jason. Attackers are continually evolving creative techniques to pass even the most vigilant frontline security. Old techniques like phishing are still prominent, but new sophisticated methods involving social engineering, targeting Internet of Things devices, infrastructure vulnerabilities, for example, are gaining popularity. In other words, the attackers are getting far more sophisticated. Therefore, it's critical for IT teams to realize that true ransomware resiliency cannot be achieved by endpoint security alone. And that brings us to the second step in 3 pillars journey. We're going to talk about protect and now moving to detect, detecting anomalous changes or disruptions. 3 pillars can now rest assured that their data is protected again from the edge to the core to the cloud. They can ensure that they can gain greater visibility to mitigate threats and vulnerabilities. 3 pillars have enabled tools and solution sets from Veritas, part of what we call our enterprise data services platform, to get complete visibility across their environment, to detect anomalies and to subsequently alert based on malicious activity that's going on in the broader environment or network. Moreover, this single comprehensive view provides 3 pillars with greater infrastructure awareness and end-to-end visibility across all storage, all backup and cloud vendors to automatically discover and protect new virtual machines, for example. Great view of that is things like tagging in cloud and being able to associate those tags straight into a backup policy. And let's not minimize, of course, the impact detection has on things like peace of mind. If I was an operator, I'd want to know that I can see and understand changes to the environment with the right tooling to then get forewarning and isolate and determine the right steps necessary to address what might be evolving in front of my eyes. The sooner 3 pillars can now detect an event or identify bad actors, the faster that they can contain and, of course, mitigate impact. Only with artificial intelligence and anomaly detection can 3 pillars identify changes or disruptions to normal behavior, that deviation from standard that can indicate the presence of unintended or even intended intentional events with a greater degree of ease or a greater degree of simplicity. Now let's take a greater look at AI-powered anomaly detection. I'll hand over to Jason.
Thanks, Jeff. In this segment, I'd like to touch on the anomaly detection capabilities that NetBackup has. We now utilize artificial intelligence to detect potential threats in the backup data stream. It uses a machine learning approach, and we collect all the data points in real time. The analysis engine is real time as well. As soon as the job is done, we can identify suspicious activity based on an algorithm that we have. The alerts are notified within the web UI, and there's nothing extra that the customer needs to install, no extra licensing needed, so they can unlock this value immediately. This is pretty exciting stuff. We've actually masked all the complexities of incorporating machine learning into NetBackup. Some of the parameters that we review are jobs policy related on the type of workload, the amount of data backed up at the time, And we also look inside the data stream to take a look at the deduplication ratio as well. If you take a look at the screen, we also generate an anomaly score. The higher the score, the more anomalous the behavior is. Of course, it's not machine learning if it cannot be taught. So we also have the ability to report false positives. And this ensures similar values detected in the future do not trigger an alert in the web UI. The anomaly events can easily be viewed under the bell icon in the top right portion of the screen. And for this given job, the anomaly is the image size. While real-time anomaly detection in itself is a compelling value, what makes this really versatile is that even backups done by previous versions of NetBackup can be analyzed for anomalies within them. The sensitivity of a machine learning algorithm can also easily be adjusted. This allows users to tune the engine for their unique workloads and level of risk tolerance. Anomaly detection is available across every NetBackup deployment and does not require any additional post-processing. It gives you real-time information about anomalies in your backup. Back over to you, Jeff. Thanks.
Most ransomware attackers hope for two things. One, time for the attack to spread, and two, money from you. Of course, to make it stop, right? Implementing an automated recovery process that provides flexibility and having an alternate option, rapidly being able to stand up a logical data center on a public cloud provider, for example, can shorten downtime and provide alternatives to paying a ransom. For three pillars, we provided them with an orchestration capability across their entire environment with a consistent user experience. Again, standardizing on a common platform, standardizing a solution set, standardizing on common tooling. What it does is it provides visibility into the type of recovery options based upon, of course, already mapped, already connected recovery targets available. So the 4 pillars, even though there's three pillars, they can maintain multiple service level objectives back to those recovery point and recovery time agreements that have now been implemented and set with their business. Further, simply having a DR plan and a graded technology doesn't offer confidence in the face of an attack. Resiliency planning also allows for things like testing and validation routines, things like non-disruptive rehearsals, time and risk measurements, right? How long did it take to recover? Or how long did it take to stand up in another environment? Can I clone an environment? Can I rehearse without requiring a significant amount of change overhead and activity and outages? We also looked at, with 3 pillars, this notion of granular visibility across their entire estate. So applications and virtual machines, what are the dependencies between them? How do we map all of that into multiple disaster scenarios? Of course, what we're doing here is we're adopting a level of orchestration that minimizes the level of impact both on the business and, of course, to people and to process. We're using workflow, we're reducing the amount or the extent of human intervention. 3 pillars also needed the ability to perform rapid bulk recovery in a virtual environment. With Veritas, they now can orchestrate agentless large-scale restores very, very quickly. We're talking about continuous data protection. So for instance, when 3 pillars performs bulk recovery with instant rollback for their VMware fleet, they've got a significant VMware fleet, change blocks are tracked and are rapidly stitched together and assembled into snapshots for full recovery of systems that they can move directly into production. By doing so, this provides instant roll capabilities for VMware, integrated protection straight into VMware with zero downtime, and facilitates faster recovery from a ransomware attack. Now let's have a look what this looks like. Jason, you're on.
Thanks, Jeff. So when it comes to recovery, NetBackup provides granular, flexible recovery options and orchestration capabilities using evacuation and resiliency plans. We provide support for a variety of RPOs, whether it is from a backup, an online file system, or replication using an array or asynchronous providers. In this video, I'd like to show you how we can take a multi-tier business application or virtual business service as we call it, and bring it online in an isolated environment at another site. Resiliency groups over here define the individual applications, whereas the virtual business service is a collection of resiliency groups, with the relationship kind of like tier 0, tier 1, tier 2. And that allows us to define a workflow of how these applications can come online or go offline. Clicking the rehearsal button is as easy as it gets in terms of moving this virtual business server that has multi-tier applications in this case from, say, our New York to London data center. So you can view the progress of this multi-tier application failover. In this case, the resiliency groups, the first one that's going to move across is the Oracle database. After the Oracle database is moved across, we have the WebLogics application moving next. And then finally, we also have an Nginx load balancer application that's scheduled to move after that. We just moved one entire virtual business service. We can now make a resiliency plan using a template format where we can define multiple resiliency groups or multiple business services that need to be moved across. Think moving an entire data center across, not just one business service. So this allows us to customize virtual business services, identify the source, the target, and also allows us to define custom scripts as part of that resiliency operation. So while we moved the entire business application into another data center, we need to be able to clean this up. So the cleanup rehearsal workflow or button on the right over here allows us to undo the operations and perform the activities in reverse. So our business service, virtual business service called finance is being cleaned up right now. So the applications will go back in the reverse order. So the Nginx first will be dismantled, then the WebLogics application, followed by the Oracle database. Net Backup Resiliency also provides a good set of reports that you can use from a compliance perspective. In summary, Net Backup Resiliency provides the ultimate framework to orchestrate moving of business services or data centers at the push of a button. Thanks for your time. Back to you, Jeff.
So in these 3 steps, as outlined today, protect, detect, and recover, the 3 pillars CEO regained confidence in their organization's ability to mitigate threats. We talk about being able to scale confidently, gives you a degree of assured protection. We talk about total visibility of what you have in your environment. If your environment's changed, we want to be able to pick that up. If you've got backup size changes, dedute rate changes, anomalous behavior going on, or if you've added 500 virtual machines for a particular event and they're tagged, we can put them straight into a cloud policy. Maybe not 500, maybe 50, but I'm sure you're following. Now, we want to ensure that restores can be undertaken, executed in minutes. We want to make sure that you get recovery at scale. Now, the bottom left quote here on this slide, the bottom left quote says it best. It says, with Veritas, we can restore lost data with 100% success. Now, only Veritas is your data always protected, always recoverable from edge to core to cloud, only with Veritas. We ensure that your data is protected with the most extensive and comprehensive support. Who else can provide such breadth? Who else can provide 100% ransomware recovery from a success rate standpoint? Thanks for your time today. If you'd like to know more, please leverage the QR code on the left. We've got further information you can read about what we've covered in this presentation. If you'd like to speak to us, leverage the QR code on the right to have one of our account managers or architects reach out. Now, we've quoted many statistics and data points today, and based on that information and our own research, we estimate that 327 organizations have been attacked during this breakout session alone. If this was your organization, can you confidently say you are ready? Are you doing all the best practices? Have you got immutable data? Have you got a single view of your backup platform and your data environment across edge to core to cloud? Can you actually look at anomalous behavior and extend that and build that beyond security technologies? Can you look at your first line of defense and your last line of defense? Can you integrate that into your operating model? Please come and talk to us by all means. Be sure to join our next breakout session on data protection for SaaS applications. Thanks very much.